Hello everybody, and welcome back to another video. In today's video, we'll be taking a look at the 2025 New Jersey gubernatorial election. I'll be giving you all an update on this race, where it stands as of the month of August, what you need to know, and of course my prediction as it stands today. We're a little under 3 months to go till Election Day, so we've got a decent number of developments that have kind of transpired here over the summer. And now it just feels like a good time to give you all an update on this race because it's going to be really interesting. And I am legitimately excited to see how this one goes. But uh, for today's video, we're going to start by looking at the 2024 election in New Jersey. I'm going to kind of talk about what I think is relevant from this race. And as you can see, it was a pretty close election. Kamala Harris only won the state by 6%. And this marked a pretty significant decrease from what happened in 2020 when Joe Biden won it by 16 points. As you can see, the state was a lot bluer 4 years ago. Biden won by less than 16%. So we got nearly a 10% shift in Trump's direction between 2020 and 2024. And that's pretty relevant because it does show, to a very real extent, a clear right trend. And it also, what it also does is it puts New Jersey on the radar, right? And we're going to talk about this in detail in just a few minutes here. But in 2021, which was just a year after Biden won New Jersey by 16, Democrats were caught sleeping. They did not expect this race to be close. The polling didn't have it close, and that allowed Democratic turnout to be, pretty bad, quite frankly, which made this race a lot closer in the end than people were expecting. And Jack Ciattarelli ran a pretty solid campaign, and he absolutely ran a good race back in 2021. But I think that was in part enabled by the fact that Democrats didn't take him seriously at any moment. It wasn't like it was, Democrats were caught sleeping, but then they recovered on October 1st. No. On Election Day, Democrats didn't think this was going to be close. And Ciattarelli, through really good persuasion in the suburbs Democrats really not getting the turnout they needed in the cities, was able to make this a really close, only a 3-point margin of victory for Phil Murphy, who is the incumbent Democratic governor running for a second term. And by the way, Phil Murphy won by 14 in 2017. He only won by 3 in 2021. So that rightward trend that we saw between 2020 and 2024, there were definitely signs of that heading into November of last year. Now, the reason that Kamala Harris didn't do well in New Jersey, and by the way, New Jersey is one of the states that got most, that trended most towards the GOP between 2020 and 2024. But what happened was there are really two areas you need to look, because New Jersey, generally we do urban, rural, suburban. New Jersey doesn't have a lot of rural areas. This is the most densely populated state in the country, and quite frankly, it's hard to find rural New Jersey in any meaningful sense politically. So if you look at the suburbs of New Jersey, you will see that unlike in other states, even in 2024, but especially in 2020, the suburbs in New Jersey did not move towards Harris at all. In fact, they swung pretty clearly towards Trump. And the best example of this by far is Morris County, which is right here. It's pretty affluent. It's very white, so it's kind of like your textbook white college-educated area that's been moving towards Democrats in the Trump era. Trump won it by 2, and that came after he lost it in 2020 by 4%. So Morris County swung 6% to the right, and that's a pretty devastating thing for Democrats and for Kamala Harris, just because this came solely off the back of persuasion. This wasn't like it was bad Democratic turnout, or it was like, even Republicans turning out new, for example, Hispanic voters. It was white Biden voters switching to Trump in 2024 to a very real extent. And that's why Morris County flipped to Trump after he'd lost it in 2020 to Joe Biden. But the bigger problem that Democrats had was in Hudson County, Essex County, and Union County. These are the 3 deep blue counties in Jersey, right? These are very, very historically very, very Democratic. Democrats rely on voters from kind of everyone. They have white working class voters. You also have a lot of Asian, Hispanic, and Black voters who have historically been very Democratic, were very friendly to Obama and Hillary Clinton. In 2020 showed some signs of moving towards Trump, but in 2024 it got really bad for Harris here. And just to kind of compare, briefly, Essex County, this is, a really important county for Democrats to net hundreds of thousands of votes in. Kamala Harris won it by 45 points. Joe Biden won it by 55. So we saw a 10-point swing in Essex County. Hudson County was, I think, even worse. Biden won this county by what it looks like a 46-point margin. Kamala Harris won it by 28. So we saw, that's like an 18-point swing. And then Union County, Harris won it by 24. Biden had won it by nearly 36 points back in 2020. So we saw pretty substantial swings towards the GOP in all three of these counties, and Camden similar. To be fair, it was a bit better for Harris, but it still swung, I think, 4 or 5 points towards Trump. So overall, the urban areas in New Jersey were really, really bad for Democrats, and part of it was turnout, right? Like if you look at the votes, you can kind of see that there was a real turnout drop. Biden got 267,000, Trump got 75,000. Trump gained 8,000 votes, but the bigger problem was that Harris dropped around 52,000 votes, or 53,000 votes roughly. 43,000 votes. Sorry, not 54. Yeah, 43,000 votes. So obviously part of it was Democratic turnout was worse in 2024. I recognize that. But a legitimate reason that Trump did well here was because there were people who voted for Biden in 2020 and voted for Trump in 2024. And you can really see this by taking a look at Dave's redistricting. Obviously, this is a very powerful tool. I love DRA. It's a free resource. It's a really great thing. We're really blessed that this is a free resource. But as you can see by looking at, hold on, yeah, I always do this wrong. But if you look at the swing from 2020 to 2024 and go to the areas of Newark that trended most towards Trump, it's like the redder the precinct, the more it moved towards Trump, and compare, for example, the Hispanic voters, you will see the overlap here. Like Paterson, New Jersey, huge Hispanic population. It sticks out as swinging most towards Trump. Elizabeth, New Jersey, another substantial Hispanic population over there. Huge swings towards Donald Trump. And so overall, what we saw was a remarkable movement towards Trump with Hispanic voters, and also to a lesser extent, but to a very real extent, Asian voters. And then we also saw some minor movement among Black voters in the GOP, in the direction of the GOP. So Democrats have had this problem for a while, right? And on this channel, you can go back, you can look at what I said in 2020, 2022. I've been saying that Democrats have a very real problem in the cities. They've been overachieving in the cities for a while. They've been winning a lot of socially conservative voters, especially of Hispanic and Asian origin, right? This is a big problem for them in New York City. I talked about this when Mamdani won, right? But it has never been so bad as to cost Democrats a 10-point margin. And a good example of how Democrats have been able to overcome this problem and kind of, put it to the side in the past is 2020. Joe Biden, look at Pennsylvania. This was the most important state in the 2020 election. I want you to literally do this. The city of Philadelphia moved nearly 4% towards Trump. He did better there in 2020 than in 2016. The reason he lost Pennsylvania was because he did poorly in the cities. Biden was able to kind of cancel out his minor losses in downtown Philadelphia by doing really well in the suburbs, in Chester County and in Montgomery County and in Delaware County. Those three counties that got a lot bluer canceled that out. But New Jersey 2024, that didn't happen. We saw Kamala Harris, to a larger scale, obviously, but still the same concept, do a lot worse in the cities. But unlike Biden in Pennsylvania, she didn't cancel it out in Morris County. She did poorly in both areas. And the swing was a bit bigger against Harris in the cities than it was in the suburbs, but it really added up. And it's why it went, New Jersey was only a 6-point margin of victory for the Democratic Party in 2024. And so now what we can do is now we understand that what happened, we can look at 2021 in a little bit more detail. Now, like I said, Phil Murphy did not benefit from a very good campaign. Ciattarelli took the race more seriously. Republicans were more energized, and Democratic turnout was pretty anemic, quite frankly, in especially in urban areas, but basically, like everywhere across the state. But what happened here that is really under discussed is that we kind of got a reversion. And by reversion, I mean this election didn't really follow the trends federally have been seeing in New Jersey, where Morris County gets bluer, but the urban areas get a bit redder. And the reason that I think that happened was because Trump wasn't on the ballot. Obviously, Trump for a Republican does really poorly in the suburbs, but does really well in urban areas. And that was in 2024, even though he did a lot better nationally than Mitt Romney, he actually did worse in the suburbs broadly, even in New Jersey in some cases. But he did, better by insane margins in Newark and in Trenton and Camden. And if you look at the 2020 swing to the 2021, at the 2020 to 2021 swing, we can see where Biden did better or where Phil Murphy did better. Across the board, Murphy did worse than Joe Biden. That's how most of the states read. But if you look at the city of Newark, and if you look at the area, right? Like this is the city of Newark right here, and then you've got also North Bergen, and then you got Elizabeth, right? Look at these blue precincts. These are areas that are predominantly Hispanic and Black, I believe, right? Just looking at Hispanic voters, fair overlap with Hispanic voters, Black voters, got a lot of overlap with Black voters as well. So that's why, even though Phil Murphy did really badly compared to Biden, like across the board, like look at Morris County, he did worse in basically every single precinct in Morris County than Biden did. He was able to win statewide because he actually did a little bit better with Black and Hispanic voters, which is interesting because he did so much worse statewide. But if you look at here, hold on, let me see. Let's compare. Yeah, here we go, 2020 to 2021. And if you look at the swing, Murphy actually outran Joe Biden in the 8th congressional district, and pretty similar to him in the 10th congressional district, even though he did worse basically everywhere else by a very real amount. So that's kind of what happened in 2021. We saw Murphy held his ground to an extent in the cities. Turnout wasn't good, but by percentages, he did fine in the cities, but he collapsed everywhere else. He did really poorly in South Jersey. He did really poorly in the western suburbs. So overall, it was a really, really I think Murphy got a little lucky that these voters in the cities were still voting for him and were still voting Democrat. But 2024 showed that they might not be voting Democratic in the future. And that's why I think this race in 2025 is going to be really interesting, because Mikey Sherrill, who's the Democratic nominee, who's a congresswoman from Morris County, partially, actually, kind of from the central north part of the state, she is going to have to do well in these cities, right? Because Democrats in the past two statewide elections in New Jersey that have been really bad for Democrats, they've lost a ton of support in the cities and in the suburbs. In 2021, it came in the suburbs. In 2024, it came in the cities, right? So Mikey Sherrill is going to have to find a way to maintain this coalition. She's going to have to win over suburban voters, right? At bare minimum, at the same level as Kamala Harris, right? Maybe, I'd say ideally she'd do better than Harris, but at the very least she'll have to put up the same performance. And then in Hudson County, in Essex County, and in Union County, she'd have to really stop the bleeding, because Democrats have been bleeding here since 2020, since 2016. Honestly, Biden didn't do that well here compared to Hillary Clinton, and so that's what it's going to come down to. Now, the good news for her is that there's still some margin for error in terms of just winning. Harris won the state by 6%. So, yeah, you can do a little bit worse in that. Democrats can play this game. They can still do a little bit worse in Essex County. They can do a little bit worse in Camden. They can do a little bit worse in Trenton. They can still win statewide. But what you want to do, ideally, especially when you're favored, which Democrats are, they want to hold their ground and maybe do a little bit better. I would say that if Mikey Sherrill wins this race by 5 or 6 points, by an amount similar to Kamala Harris, that wouldn't be that great of a performance for her. Typically, in off-year gubernatorial elections, the party out of power has an advantage. That happened in 2021. Republicans had lost the presidency, but in 2021, they came back, they won Virginia, did really well in New Jersey as well. So by taking a look at how Democrats have done in special elections this year, at generic ballot polling, I would expect Mikey Sherrill to have a fundamental edge in this race to start out with. However, we're going to see without Trump on the ballot if Republicans are going to be able to punch back in the suburbs, right? Because if you look at 2021, Phil Murphy, the Democrat, lost Morris County by 11 points, which is way worse than what Harris did in 2024, even though Harris to begin with didn't do all that great in Morris County. So Democrats, they have some margin of error, but they run a very real risk of kind of doing what Harris did in 2024, but actually worse, where they lose support in the suburbs because Trump's not on the ballot, but they're unable to get back to their, to improve at all in Essex County or in Hudson County. And that's going to be a very real problem for them going forward, I think, long term. For now, my prediction is that Democrats are going to hold on to this race by, I think, 5 to 7 points, which I don't think is that great of performance. Just to be honest here, I don't think that's a great performance for Democrats, right? To run even with your presidential candidate in an off-year election after you just lost, usually you want to do better. You want to gain momentum. But the fact of the matter is, the last time Jack Ciattarelli was on the ballot, he did well. From what we've seen, he's been able to run solid campaigns. Mikey Sherrill, I think, is a fine candidate for Democrats, which is why I think Democrats are still favored to win this race. But at this point in time, just based on what we know, I don't know if I trust New Jersey Democrats necessarily to get the turnout that they'd like to have in the cities, or to claw back in the suburbs, especially because, by the way, Trump is the president, and his approval ratings aren't great right now, but Democrats have run New Jersey for 8 years. I think there might be some very real anger from voters especially affluent voters who, maybe don't care as much about social issues, but really do buy into some Republican messaging about cost of living, about taxes. Right? New Jersey is a pretty expensive state to live in. It's a high tax state. Jack Ciattarelli, I think, can run that message pretty effectively in wealthy suburban areas, and so that's why, even though on paper Democrats might be looking to win back Morris County or to do well with these voters, especially with Trump back in office, it's trickier in blue states. If this were in, maybe the Midwest and a swing state or in a redder state, I could see there, being an argument for that. But this is a state where Democrats are still kind of on the defensive because they've held the governorship here for 8 years. And Jack Ciattarelli has been intentional about that, right? The Republicans don't want to make this race about Trump, even though Ciattarelli, I think, to be fair, has embraced Trump a little bit, which I'm not sure is going to help him in a state like New Jersey. But this is still a local race. This is not a national race. And I think Republicans recognize that works to their advantage because they can run on issues like taxes, like I just said. And so even though you do have a very favorable backdrop for Democrats fundamentally, I'm not necessarily so sure if that's going to translate into a huge win. That being said, I'm still predicting that Sherrill's going to win. She leads in most polls, though it's not by a ton. So, as I always say, we're going to wait and see. We're going to get more polling. We're going to get more data, and we're going to check back in around a month from now. So thanks so much for watching. Let me know what you're expecting for this race, and I'll see you all next time.